Hello everyone, Alec Elger the SideQuest Gamer here, and it's time we finish off this Zelda Marathon that's been going on for months. I didn't originally plan for this to happen, but there's been some scheduling difficulties when it came to making these videos and getting them out on time, but the good news is the Majora's Mask review is finally here after suffering development hell, if I do say so myself. Say hello to Retropolis Zone.
Hello to Retropolis Zone.
Why didn't I see that coming? The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask is the sixth entry in the Zelda series and the follow-up to Ocarina of Time. Upon release, it was met with critical acclaim by critics. In fact, everyone liked this game, although critics were noticeably more generous with the praise than the fans were. The Zelda fans liked Majora's Mask enough, but like the critics, they initially didn't think it was as good as Ocarina of Time, mainly finding the 3-day time cycle a hindrance to their overall fun with the game. But ever since more people were entering the Ocarina of Time is overrated bandwagon around 2011, the universal praise that Ocarina of Time used to get shifted towards Majora's Mask, oddly for the same reason why people initially dismissed it being the 3-day time cycle. They viewed Majora's Mask as a superior entry and sometimes even the underrated 3D Zelda game, although now it and Wind Waker are like the most popular entries in the series, especially since Majora's Mask was remastered for the 3DS in 2015.
In terms of development, it began as a project known as Euro Zelda and would alter the dungeon designs of Ocarina of Time. Then, in 1999, this project was announced as Zelda Gaiden, which basically means Zelda Side Story. Kind of makes sense given the context of the game. But, unlike its predecessor, which took 4 years to make, Majora's Mask only took 1 year to develop, due to reusing assets from Ocarina of Time. This is especially noticeable with character models and such.
Director Eiji Aonuma was intimidated by the worldwide success of Ocarina of Time. How would he follow up Ocarina of Time? How would he make a game that would at least meet similar success to Ocarina of Time? The solution? Miyamoto and Aonuma thought of the 3-day time cycle, which would make this game very different than its predecessor. You'll see why when we delve into the gameplay. The game begins with young Link riding young Epona into the forest.
The game's text explains that Link is in this forest looking for a friend, which is either Saria or Navi, because for some reason, Navi departed at the end of Ocarina of Time when they returned to the original timeline. Whether Link finds the friend or not is never explained in the game, but next thing, a mysterious figure knocks out Link and his horse. The culprit turns out to be the Skull Kid, that one funky Lost Woods inhabitant from Ocarina of Time. He's wearing a tribal mask of some sort and is accompanied by two fairy siblings, the yellow one named Tattle and the purple one named Tail. Tail? I guess it's Tail.
But as you pursue Skull Kid who steals your horse, you go through obstacles teaching you how Link controls in case you're one of the few who didn't play Ocarina of Time beforehand. This intro sequence is a lot better than Kokiri Forest in the predecessor, since something is actually happening. Thank you, game, for throwing me into the action. But anyways, once you land at the bottom of the pit, Skull Kid somehow transforms you into a Deku Scrub, and the next set of obstacles now teaches you how to play as a Deku Scrub since it has its own control scheme that's much different than normal Link.
So, Skull Kid and Tail leave, locking behind Tattle, who desperately attempts to follow the two before the door slams shut in front of her. Separated from her brother, Tattle angrily teams up with Link in an effort to get out of the room. Over the course of the journey, she acts as a replacement for Navi in the previous game, except less intrusive. Thank Hylia. Once you make it through the Deco Flower Copter obstacles, you'll meet the Happy Mask salesman who then drops the infamous lines, "You've met with a terrible fate, haven't you?"
Great observation. Next thing you'll know, he'll say, "Water is wet, isn't it?" The Happy Mask salesman, who was a very minor optional to talk to character in Ocarina of Time, now has a prominent role in this adventure. He asks you to retrieve the mask the Skull Kid stole, and he'll help you, but you only have 3 days to do it. Which is a nice way of telling the player you have less than 3 real-life hours to do so. Yes, because a minute in real life is around an hour in Termina time. Oh yes, you're in the land of not Hyrule but instead Termina, which is an unsettling name in itself.
Now, hold on a minute. Why do you have 3 days? Well, if you do explore Clock Town because you have no other choice in Deku Scrub form as the guards prevent you from leaving, some people talk about the Imp, which is implied to be the Skull Kid. Skull Kid is a mischievous fellow as described by the Bomber's gang. He's pulled a few pranks that angered the town's folk, but recently his pranks have gone too far. So far, in fact, that he's pulling the biggest prank of them all, destroying Termina by having the moon crash on it. However, because the moon is slow and Skull Kid probably loves the suspense or something, you have 72 in-game hours to prevent that from happening.
With that information in mind, you as Deku Scrub Link first rescue a stray yellow fairy and take it to the Great Fairy of North Clocktown, and the Great Fairy will give you magic needed to use the Deku Snot ability. Ew. You blow a snot bubble to pop the giant balloon that the kid in North Clocktown is trying to pop, and he'll ask you to find him and his 4 friends throughout Clocktown. Find them before morning and they'll tell you the code needed to access the underground passage needed to reach the man with the giant telescope. He asks you to look into it. Zoom in at the top of the clock tower when you're looking through the telescope and you'll see Skull Kid either dancing or just summoning the moon. Either way, Link looks up at the moon and it shoots out a moon's tear. Collect it, then return to South Clocktown, go to the giant Deku Flower. The business scrub will let you use the launch flower in exchange for the moon's tear. Now, if you have the time to spare, go to the middle building in West Clocktown, talk to the Scarecrow, and have him dance the night and day away until the night of the final day, where Clock Tower will open up at midnight. Kill some time, but at midnight, use the launch flower to go into the tower and confront Skull Kid. He still has your Ocarina of Time.
During the encounter, Tattle demands Skull Kid to give back the mask, but he doesn't listen and brags about his current position instead. Tail intervenes, mentioning the 4 areas you need to visit, and that you need to bring the 4 of them to the clock tower. Who Tail is referring to, you'll learn later in the game, because of SideQuest Gamer's annoying no-ending spoilers rule for audio commentary. By the way, that's not my joke, that's his, he wrote it down for me to say. Anyway, once you spit a bubble of all things at Skull Kid, he'll drop the Ocarina and you'll learn the Song of Time through a flashback to when Link learned it from Zelda before he departed on his adventure.
Keep in mind, this is the new timeline where Link warned Hyrule of Ganondorf's true intentions, and therefore ending this cycle of Ganondorf taking Hyrule over. So Link has nothing more to do other than wander out in search of new adventure. So you play the Song of Time, go back to the beginning of the 3-day cycle, and start your actual adventure. The 3-day time cycle really does add a new layer of challenge in this adventure, as it actually gives you an incentive to do things quickly and efficiently. Now, when you do reset the time cycle, your progress will also be saved, but only the masks and treasures you collect will be saved along with it. But as for things like rupees, bombs, arrows, and all that, well, that's gone. I mean, the game will save that you did get those items in the first place, but they'll be set at the 0 value, and you have to repurchase the items like arrows and bombs, or you can cut grass and kill enemies and find those items there.
Actually, you can store rupees within the West Clocktown banker as well, who seems to exist in a non-linear time cycle. All he needs from you is a stamp for confirmation, and you can withdraw or store rupees. They'll always be there regardless of what cycle you're in.
But I am glad this time the Song of Time has much more use than it did in the previous game, where all you needed it for was to open a door and get rid of those annoying blocks. It had little to do with actual time. But this time the song has meaning as well as its variations. Like if you press C right, A, C down, you'll fast forward to the beginning of the next 12-hour cycle. If you press C down, A, C down, A, C right, you'll get to slow down or restore time back to normal. If you do slow down time, you'll have 3 times as much time to do what you need to do. I recommend doing this when you do the dungeons, as they can be as long as 3 real-life hours on your first playthrough, and trust me, sometimes you don't want to be forced to reset the time cycle when you're just near the treasure or just near the boss room, and then have to go all the way back and find all the silver keys again. That really sucks. And when you do the side quests, which are a major part of this game, you have to do very time-specific things where if you screw up just a little bit, you'll have to reset the time cycle all over. Well, that would be player error. Punishing, but understandable. But what's not understandable is why the Song of Double Time wouldn't allow me to pick a specific hour instead of having me to be forced to kill several real-life minutes doing monotonous stuff like running around or just waiting for that specific hour. Like, if you do the Anju Cafe side quest or the Romani side quest, you'll see what I mean. Of course, there's nothing stopping you from doing other shorter side quests in the meantime, like helping the two dancers in West Clocktown or helping Toto test out the sound equipment on the Milk Bar stage. It's all up to you. But for something very time-specific like fighting off alien invaders in Romani Ranch, I want to be there so I don't miss it, as even if I'm a second off, then I'd fail the mission and have to restart the time cycle. And it can get very tedious. For say there's like a side quest on the very last day, you would have to play the Song of Double Time several times. I just wish if you play the Song of Double Time, you could pick a specific hour, not only that, a specific day as well, instead of having to play it 5 times just to get to the day or night of the final day. Now, they do fix many of these issues with the 3DS remake where you can warp to a specific hour, which makes the side quests so much easier and the game just more fun.
You know, I can totally relate to what you're saying, man. A lot of the side quests are kind of fetch questy by nature, where the player must trade items or trigger events by talking to certain people at certain intervals, and sometimes even with certain items or masks already at hand. Almost every procedure is hinted at in some way or another, so paying attention to little details and reading text should always be enough to clear side quests. And in that sense, I think they are pretty entertaining. The sense of exploration and discovery, it felt rewarding and comforting to me to help the people in need without outside assistance. The problems can arise when you overlook an important detail or fail a necessary task. Depending on what quest you're tackling, the time frame to accomplish something can be very strict or has to be done perfectly at once without any retries. Like you said, Alec, great examples include saving the cows at Romani Ranch from aliens and retrieving the sun's mask from Seikon in his hideout. It's an absolute chore if you mess these up because you're gonna have to reset the cycle and wait for all the time-specific triggers again to move the quests forward. If playing the Song of Double Time and watching the clock tick was boring the first time around, it's all the more of a pain the second or even third attempts. Thankfully, not nearly all side quests are so precise with their requirements. You can save the invisible guard at Ikana Valley whenever you see fit, you can hatch the cuckoos for grog across the nights of all 3 days, and you can help Todo fine-tune the equipment at the milk bar whenever it's opened on day 1 and day 2. There are enough diversions to keep you busy with, and the Bomber's Notebook definitely helps managing everything, which keeps track of who you can interact with at what point in time. The overall execution of the side quests with the 3-day cycle leaves something to be desired for sure, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't greatly enjoy interacting with the folks from Termina. There's a lot of likable characters with memorable traits, and the game also delivers humorous moments through dialogue and animations.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Retropolis Zone. I like side quests as much as the next guy, but sometimes they can get really tedious if there's so many things you have to do right and then get punished severely for messing one tiny little thing up. That may be easily forgiven by others, but that's fine, but it does kind of hinder my ability to have the most fun out of the game. But as for dungeons, there are only 4 of them: the Woodfall Palace, the Snowhead Mountain, Great Bay Temple, and Stone Tower. The Woodfall Palace is a fantastic first dungeon and probably my favorite in the series, as it's not too easy, but not too hard. The platforming involving Scrublink was just really fun with all the launch flowers and whatnot. The second one, being the Snowhead Mountain, can be kind of annoying as it's built with Goron Link in mind. There's a lot of ramps and inclined planes to roll around on, but what's annoying is when you make one little mistake on the ramps, you'll fall all the way back to the ground floor and have to make the climb all the way back to the top. The Great Bay Temple I hated on my first playthrough and was more confusing than even the Water Temple, but now it's not that bad. It can get a little confusing with all the rooms you have to play through as Zora Link and have to change the direction of the current, but it was manageable and I beat it in like an hour and a half. But Stone Tower, oh man, I hate Stone Tower. If the climb up there wasn't tedious enough, there are several puzzles that requires the Elegy of Emptiness. Then once you get the treasure, you get out of the dungeon, play the Elegy of Emptiness on the middle platform switch, hit the red eye with the light arrows, have to turn upside down, and you're in the upside down version of the temple. This temple makes use of all three transformation masks, and switching from one to another got old really fast, and the bosses were really easy. It's not bad, but it sure was annoying.
Honestly, I thought the dungeons were all pretty great. Yeah, there is something to be said for having to equip the Great Fairy Mask for luring in stray fairies, having to switch masks in general really, and the Elegy of Emptiness that slows down puzzle solving to a crawl. That said, the dungeon designs themselves made me scratch my head here and there. When playing Ocarina of Time, the solution to a puzzle is usually found in the same room as the puzzle itself, and even then it is mostly about hitting an eyeball or pushing some blocks. In Majora's Mask, you kind of have to think outside the box pretty frequently and see how the various rooms connect together. Not counting the Woodfall Temple, all the other dungeons in the game have a central mechanic that affect where you can and cannot go, and I like that. I found the same with the Water Temple in Ocarina of Time. I think it's absolutely reasonable if people find the backtracking and somewhat confusing navigation a turn off, and plummeting down multiple floors in the Snowhead Temple, but I dig it when I have to put pieces together and form a constructed picture of the entire layout as a whole in my head. I also love the inclusion of the stray fairies. You can ignore them if you find the task of collecting them all too daunting and difficult, but for those who are looking for an extra layer of challenge in the dungeons, I think 15 of these little guys floating around should satisfy those needs very well.
Yeah, I actually found the fairy hunting side quests to be really rewarding to me. They took less than an hour to find, and the payoff for finding them was well worth the time spent finding them. However, the bosses of the dungeons were pretty hit or miss. I mean, I loved Adalwa, as he felt like a traditional Zelda boss battle requiring constant thinking with a change in boss strategy and attack pattern. The second one, being Goat, is definitely my favorite in the game, as he rolls around and you have to reach him in kind of like a chase battle. But then it goes downhill from there, as Gyorg is a complete joke with the Zora Beam and Boomerang Flippers, and Twin Mold is so easy, it's kind of sad really. The final boss, which I won't reveal, can either be a really cool boss fight if you don't get the hidden fourth transformation mask, or a complete pushover if you do get it. You will have to earn the fourth transformation mask, and I dare not spoil it, but it does make the final boss very underwhelming.
I assume that was the point of the developers though. Acquiring all 20 masks is not exactly easily or quickly done, so I think this reward has all the right to blow your mind and make you feel like a massive badass. Now that you were speaking on bosses, however, I kind of feel the same on them. Odalwa is your typical 3D Zelda fight, so it works I guess, and this guy is extremely goofy by the way with his chanting, and Goat requires you to give chase in Goron form. It's kind of like a catch-up race while avoiding attacks and obstacles, and that's pretty unique. The Gyorg fight feels repetitive and uninteresting though, and while I like Twin Mold as a boss concept, it's annoying how you cannot lock onto them. Also, if you run out of magic and arrows, you're pretty much
Agree more. Even at their worst, the dungeons and bosses are still fun for the most part. But there is an elephant in the metaphoric room that I'm surprised more people haven't addressed when talking about Majora's Mask. While the dungeons themselves are well designed, I do think that getting to them can be really annoying. The swamp and the Snowhead Mountain aren't the worst things in the world, as you have to get the necessary treasures in order to access those dungeons. Fine enough, but it does get pretty annoying when you enter the Great Bay, and especially Ikana Valley. With the Great Bay, you should have 4 bottles by now. You need to rescue the Zora eggs using the bottles, so you go into the Pirate's Fortress, and I recommend getting the Stone Mask beforehand to make stealth easier, as the pirates will kick you out of their fortress if you get caught. Kind of similar to the stealth action in Ocarina of Time, except a lot better. So get the 4 eggs from there, backtrack to the Great Bay Scientist, put the eggs in the tank, but then talk to the sailor, and I hope you got a good picture of one of the pirates, or else be like me and backtrack to get the picture near the fortress entrance. but use that picture to trade it for the seahorse needed to guide you to Pinnacle Rock, where the other 3 Zora eggs are. Rescue those 3 eggs, backtrack to the science lab, deposit the last of the eggs in the tank, and they'll form a song. Play it by Lulu, and finally you can go to the Great Bay Temple.
Boy, do I feel your pain there, Alec. The egg hunt was a very tedious endeavor for me because I wanted to see how well the main quest was playable without the various goodies obtained through side quests. I adore the Pirate's Fortress for its stealth mechanics, and it's a heck of a lot better than Gerudo's Fortress because it's a wide open space with much less tight corridors, a superior suit for the camera system in these games. Unfortunately, it's a slog to return all 7 eggs with 1 bottle. You constantly have to warp back to the Marine Research Lab and then swim back to the Pirate's Fortress or Pinnacle Rock. In my opinion, ignoring the side quests should make the adventure harder, not annoying to deal with and artificially long like that.
Well, that was tedious, and it gets a lot worse with Ocarina Valley. After you access the Grave of the Iron Knuckle and defeat it, you'll meet Flat, who will teach you the Song of the Storms. Play it to his brother Sharp so that the river flows again, reactivating the anti-Gibdo music box. Go into the house when the little girl is outside, play the Song of Healing to her father, get the Gibdo mask, and then go to the well. By the way, I hope you have 5 magic beans, 10 Deku nuts, and a blue healing potion, as this Gibdo trading sequence in the well, while not as bad as I remember since some of the items are in the rooms of the well itself, can be such a hassle, as the blue potion would require you to go to the witch's potion shop back at the swamp with the bottle of mushrooms you can only find with the pig mask. Good thing that the river below Ocarina Valley leads right to the swamp if you fall in, but it's still annoying to go from one region to another back and forth just to get the necessary items to progress further into the region you were currently in. If you journey to one place but don't have an item that you can only get at one specific location that's not even near where you are, I find it a failure of the designers for not telling you ahead of time that you're going to need a specific item. Like at Ocarina Valley, there could have been some form of warning, like a Garo telling you that you'll need a blue potion, several number of bombs, or Deku nuts before going into the well, instead of falling down it, finding out for myself, and then having to climb back up and go to the swamp to find a blue potion. That is not fun, that is annoying. But after that somewhat tedious trading sequence, you're at Ikana Castle, which is like a mini dungeon, but be sure to bring a big bomb with you for the second section, otherwise more backtracking to Clock Town to buy a powder keg. Although to be fair, the Gyros in Ikana Valley tell you about needing a giant explosive if you summon them wearing the Gyro mask. After fighting the mini-boss, you learn the Elegy of Emptiness, which is required for the worst part of the game, the climb to Stone Tower. Why? You need to form bridges with at least 4 sets of 3 switches where a statue will be needed to make it stay triggered. Problem is, play the song New Statue, but to keep that statue in place when you want to make another, you have to use one of the 2 transformations heavy enough to do so, being Zora and Goron Link. You have to do this several times, and if you mess up a little bit, you have to do this all over again, and I really hate this puzzle.
This very climb right here actually made me rage quit, believe it or not. To advance, you sometimes have to switch over to Zora form, which wouldn't be a big issue if the fire bats that fly around in this area didn't cause Zora Link to instantly pass out and be reset to the very bottom of this entire ordeal. This happened to me 3 times, and while yes, that's perhaps in part due to my own carelessness, it is the combination of the Elegy of Emptiness puzzles being so pace-breaking and the super harsh punishment of coming in contact with fire bats as Zora Link that I despise this section of the game. It's not difficult. The puzzles and platforming are pretty straightforward, in fact. It is the complete awfulness of the Elegy of Emptiness and having to endure it so often that make the Stone Tower climb so arbitrarily long and an utter hassle to deal with.
Exactly. I'd rather take a difficult puzzle than a tedious one, and the Elegy of Emptiness puzzles fall into the latter. The journey to the Stone Tower from the Gibdo trading sequence to the climb to Stone Tower are flaws of the game that I'm frankly surprised not many people mention in their reviews of Majora's Mask, or even when talking about the game. provided these instances happen occasionally, but when someone says Majora's Mask doesn't have backtracking whatsoever, especially when compared to its predecessor, is when I have to highly disagree. Multiple playthroughs and knowledge of what to do before this and that can reduce any backtracking to absolute zero, but what is a first timer without any outside knowledge supposed to do? This is what I call a temporary flaw. It's a flaw that exists in a game but can't really bother you once you're aware of how to bypass it in further playthroughs. Like if you know where to bomb certain areas in the original Legend of Zelda, the only hindrance to your fun now is just the controls and combat. Once you know where all the power stars in Super Mario 64 are and know the best way to get 100 coins in each level, then all you have to deal with is the camera. Once you memorize the questionable enemy placement and levels in the first two Sonic games, even Metropolis Zone wouldn't be as bad. These are all temporary flaws of these games, and while they may not bother people who've done multiple playthroughs of the game, it can be really annoying for first timers who have no outside knowledge of the game whatsoever and may detract them from playing the game any further after the first time they beat it, if they even bother beating it in the first place. But that's all I really have for negatives, and that was only to highlight the few negatives that could hinder someone's enjoyment with the game. Me personally, I'll take really long cutscenes in Hyrule Field any day over the Stone Tower and the annoying LG of Emptiness puzzles. Some may disagree, but I always say that one individual's fun is another individual's filler. But as for the positives, well, thanks to the mandatory use of the memory expansion pack, the world of Termina, while smaller than Hyrule, does have much more going for it. I love how the memory expansion lets each and every NPC have individual actions for the 3-day cycle at very specific moments. For example, in Ocarina of Time, all the red-haired lady with the cuckoos, now known as Anju, just stood there and only changed dialogue for the day and night event as well as the present and future events, but there's nothing going for her other than standing in one place per event. But in Majora's Mask, you actually see her have a life. She does run the counter at the hotel, but you see her try to give her grandmother food and then they argue. You see her walk around Clocktown looking for her missing fiance and even interacting with other characters like the postman. Same goes for people like Romany, Crimea, Gorman the troop leader, same goes for the purple-haired kid with the Keaton mask, and even Sakon the thief. The characters I mentioned often do certain actions at certain in-game hours that only repeats when you reset that 3-day time cycle, and personally, I think that's a really cool use of the memory expansion pack. Not only that, but texture popping has seemed to improve compared to its predecessor. It wasn't the worst thing in Ocarina of Time, as they did a really fine job hiding it with areas like the Lost Woods, but Hyrule Field does have instances of trees and bushes popping, which is kind of noticeable. But Majora's Mask is just more vast when it comes to draw distance and texture popping. Great Bay and Termina Field are probably the best examples of this, as everything in that area can be seen from afar, with the worm-like enemies being an example of this. Speaking of Termina, it's smaller than Hyrule Field, which does make it easier to traverse from Clocktown to whichever of the 5 areas you can visit, although I noticed this game is a little more linear than Ocarina of Time, whereas there isn't a choose your next dungeon point like there was with Ocarina of Time Spirit Temple or Shadow Temple. You can't access the mountain without the bow and arrow from the Woodfall dungeon. You can't access Romany Ranch without the powder keg you would get from the Big Goron at the mountainside. You can't get to Ikana Valley or the Great Bay without something you need to get from Romany Ranch, and so on and so forth. But I never minded linearity in Zelda games as long as there is still that sense of freedom and exploration available. For example, you can still choose what side quests you can do, but some side quests require main quest items or other side quest rewards being masks to finish them. Whether you do some of the side quests before or after any of the dungeons is entirely up to you.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the linear main quest either. Ocarina of Time was largely linear in story progression as well, besides the fact you can switch the orders of the Fire and Water Temples and Shadow and Spirit Temples around. The side quests is really where the game's freedom comes into play and where everybody's playthroughs are going to differ. The difficulty of the main quest can also be dictated by how and when you complete the plethora of optional content, which I've always appreciated for replay value purposes. I'm also there there with you that Termina Field is a significant improvement over Hyrule Field. It may be smaller, but it's more condensed and content rich. Majora's Mask on the whole has this feel of optimizing the use of every bit of space in the world design. There is something to discover around every corner, which I cannot say nearly as much for Ocarina of Time. On top of that, the graphics of Majora's Mask are a heck of a lot nicer. Not only because of the expansion pack and the small graphical upgrades that do considerably stack up, but the overall art style is more appealing to me too. So many areas have better contrasting colors. Just compare Termina Field to Hyrule Field and the former looks so much more diversified and bright. A common criticism is the recycling of heaps of character models from Ocarina of Time. And while I am fairly confident that's the approach they took for time-constrained reasons, the great writing around each of these personalities make it a non-issue. In fact, show me pictures of character models from Ocarina of Time and I'd probably recognize them as the Majora's Mask counterparts instead.
Yeah, all those NPCs from Ocarina of Time were rebranded in Majora's Mask as supposedly interdimensional counterparts, where Termina is another dimension separate from Hyrule. That would be a good excuse, although it was kind of jarring seeing Kid and Adult Malon being reused as sisters Cremia and Romani. Even weirder with the three Gorman brothers reusing Ingo's farmer and businessman character models. There are new character models like that purple-haired kid with the Keaton mask, Madame Aroma, the Mayor, the Rosa sisters, and many others, so it's not a complete reuse of assets as they add new ones in addition to the existing ones as well. Not to mention the colorization of the level geometry and character models are much more vibrant than in Ocarina of Time. I found myself getting even more immersed into the world of Termina as a result. So immersed that sometimes when I look up at the in-game sky, I feel a sense of discomfort. How would you feel if the end of the world would happen at the end of 3 days? All those happy people with the problems of everyday life just incinerated. All those stories, all the history of Termina just vaporized within seconds.
They could just duck and cover.
We all know that only works with nuclear disasters. The game controls just as fine as it did in Ocarina of Time if you're playing as Link. As for the other transformations, the Deku Scrub controls fine with all of its movement capabilities, but with Goron Link, I find him really slow, and when rolling, I feel like I have limited control over the turns. And Zora Link just doesn't feel right when swimming. When I want to do a dolphin jump, I feel like it needs to be very Z-axis specific in order to make the jump I want to make, most notably in Stone Tower. So they just control fine for the most part, as they're not well equipped for combat, and I don't think they're supposed to be. And I'll be honest, I don't really like the transformations as much as everyone else seems to, but I'll say they're better than the tunics and boots options from Ocarina of Time.
Well, I do think the transformations are pretty cool and the developers could squeeze a lot more moves and capabilities into less items, which drastically reduces menu navigation and such, but I understand that the controls can be finicky. Your movement direction as Deku Scrub Link can easily get disorganized when soaring through the air, and landing onto higher platforms from a dolphin jump as Zora Link can be pretty darn precise, notably in the Stone Tower Temple as you said. I have no complaints about Goron Link though, besides that the camera sometimes struggles following you and taking corners in rolling formation. The turns in the Snowhead Temple immediately spring to mind on that.
The music is definitely well orchestrated, and while I don't like it as much as its predecessor, overall the individual tracks I really enjoy are phenomenal. My favorite track is probably the one where the moon is going to crash in 6 in-game hours. It's such an autonomous sensory meridian response moment for me because the apocalypse is just moments away in real life, and the music just makes it all the more unsettling. I also really like the fast Clock Town theme, especially since the tempo increases as you get closer to the final day. It just shows that even though an apocalypse is coming, the people are just going about their peaceful lives doing busy work and such. There's just something human about it. But like the predecessor, I am really not a fan of the keyboard synthesizers you'd hear in games like this, Star Fox 64, and other Nintendo 64 games. I just don't find those types of instruments pleasant or even epic to listen to. I also noticed in the 4 main areas they all have variations of a similar melancholy melody that's kind of depressing to listen to, with my favorite variation being the Ikana Valley version. There's also the reused tracks like the shop theme and the ranch theme, which are a welcome addition as always, although it's kind of jarring to hear the Lost Woods theme in the Forest of Mystery. I know they're similar, but that song was only heard because it's Saria's song, and Saria is not an inhabitant of this forest.
I've never really thought of it that way, but that's kinda strange now that you mention that. Either way, I do enjoy Majora's Mask soundtrack. The 3 Clock Town arrangements perfectly reflect the atmosphere and people's attitudes in town across the 3 days, and the music overall has a depressing and melancholy undertone to most of it. Termina Field's theme is the iconic Legend of Zelda theme, but it ends with long, unsettling strings reminding you of the floating rock that's above your head at all times, and the observatory song sounds gorgeously dreamy yet strangely sad at the same time. There are a lot of reused tracks from Ocarina of Time, which are fine compositions, I'm not knocking them, and I do dig a lot of the newer stuff like the Milk Bar and the Stone Tower Temple background songs. Likewise, I think the instrument samples for many of Nintendo's games on the system are lame and unimpressive. It all just sounds so generically MIDI, but Majora's Mask score is remarkable nonetheless. It shows Koji Kondo was not only capable of writing upbeat, happy music like he usually did, but also dark and gloomy music.
I agree, Retropolis Zone. Koji Kondo always knew what to do with the limitations of the console he was working with. He's honestly one of my favorite composers in gaming, and Majora's Mask is probably one of those reasons. But overall, The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, I guess I'm in the new minority who prefers Ocarina of Time over Majora's Mask, if that wasn't evident enough. While the predecessor isn't perfect by any means, or even the best game of all time, I find Majora's Mask to be a very good game. Nothing more, nothing less. But I wasn't disappointed with Majora's Mask. No, I really like this game, but I just don't love it because while there are several nice improvements that many can appreciate, I just find the new bumps in the road just too annoying to rank over Ocarina of Time. In fact, I really wouldn't put this game in my top 5 favorite Zelda games. But I don't even view Majora's Mask as a sequel because it stands out so much it's not even in the shadow of its predecessor. Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are two very different, well-crafted video games. You're going to like one more than the other, but you'll still like the other unless you don't like any of these games fun for one reason or another. But I like both games and can recommend the 3DS versions to everyone who craves adventure games. Like Ocarina of Time, the 3D version is definitely the way to go, as there's not much reason to play the original version unless you're a collector or Nintendo 64 enthusiast. They did change up some things like boss strategy and added a fishing area for the 3DS version, which is pretty cool if I do say so myself. I give this game an 87 out of 100, but what are your overall thoughts, Retropolis Zone?
I'll come out straight away that I won't be giving a score, since I find it unpractical and would always want to change it later. But I can safely say Majora's Mask is one of my favorite Zelda games. It has significant flaws in its execution with the 3-day time cycle, flaws largely fixed by the 3DS version apparently, but the engrossing story, the world of Termina with its cast of likable characters, and strong dungeon design to seal the deal make up for that in my opinion. Majora's Mask is definitely not for everybody. It's a time sink of a game if you plan to fully complete it without a guide like I did, sometimes painfully so. But there is nothing quite like it that I have ever played. Most impressive about it all though is that Nintendo didn't just create an improved Ocarina of Time. They realized their tight development schedule and used older assets to shape a completely different experience. For that reason, I have no verdict on whether Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask is the better title. They are truly like apples and oranges.
So that's our review of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask for the Nintendo 64. Thank you so much for joining us, Retropolis Zone. Thank you so much for the second opinion, even though it's not mine, so therefore it's wrong.
No problem, Alec. It was fun having a superior opinion to yours and proving it. Now then.
Right, the collaborators agreements. Let's roll the footage, shall we? Check out Retropolis Zone, the review channel where quickies don't cut it. Well, that sounded suggestive, but anyways, he makes very elaborate reviews of retro video games, hence the name Retropolis Zone. And a few videos I do recommend checking out are his Crash Bandicoot 1 and 2 reviews, his hour-long Ocarina of Time review, and his Shadow the Hedgehog videos. He's also making an Ape Escape 2 review that'll be coming out soon. If it didn't come out already, it depends when I publish the video. And his upcoming Majora's Mask solo review. I'm pretty sure he has a lot more to say about the game than he did in this review. But now that I'm at the end of the Zelda Marathon, I should give my overall thoughts on the series progression as a whole. Zelda 1 and 2, looking back on them, introduced game mechanics that would be improved upon by later installments, although they do have some 8-bit charm to them that was kind of lost in the sequels. I know a few people who only play these NES Zelda games and really couldn't get into the sequels, and that's understandable. But I still think Zelda 1 and 2 are decent games at best that, while haven't aged the best, they're still celebrated even by newer generations of gamers, not as solid starting points for the series, but as a game within themselves. However, A Link to the Past I much prefer over any of the other entries in the Zelda series because it's the most fun for me to complete, and it's still a somewhat challenging game even with repeat playthroughs. Its follow-up, Link's Awakening, is another great entry as well, and I do plan on revisiting that game in the future, but maybe for like a handheld Zelda marathon. I still haven't decided yet. But for now, I'll say that I enjoy it, even if it's more linear than its predecessor and obviously has downgraded graphics, but it's for the Game Boy, it's understandable. Ocarina of Time, you've heard me chant that it's not overrated because everyone seems to have reservations against it. I do have a few of my own, and I am not going to say that this is the best game of all time, nor even the best 3D Zelda game of all time. It's by no means perfect, not even back then. To say this game is the best game of all time says that I think game design can't possibly get any better than Ocarina of Time, and that's clearly not the case since there were various things I would have changed myself. If a game is so perfect, then there's no constructive criticism I could even offer. But regardless, I still enjoy Ocarina of Time on its own merits. I think it's held up better than the likes of Super Mario 64, Super Smash Bros., and Mario Kart 64, and I like those games too. Majora's Mask seems to mean a lot to Zelda fans like my colleague, the Ryan Sucks at Video Games, and well, obviously, Retropolis Zone, which has had him on the episode. And while it's not in my personal top 5 favorite Zelda games, I understand why people love this game. If there's anything to take away from this speech, no game is perfect. Not even my favorite games of all time are perfect. I think they come close to it, but still have some minor issues to me, which could be major issues to others, and vice versa. But if the end result is you having fun with the game, regardless of what others say about it, then the game has served its purpose well, to entertain. And if you haven't played any of these games, I say give any of these Zelda games a shot. I recommend Ocarina of Time 3D or Majora's Mask 3D as starting points, and then ease yourself into the 2D titles, if you want to see why Nintendo fans revere the Zelda series as much as they do. So much for your patience and especially for watching this video, and remember to stay awesome.